Hi, welcome to Learn Code and Create Day 19. It's been a few days since you have been learning JavaScript, and so far it is sounding great and interesting. And in this episode, I would like us to push the needle a little bit further in learning JavaScript. Although the title sounds an advanced, but more advanced subjects are to come in our next seasons. So in this video, I would like us to push a little bit further on functions and some of the few things we've learned in JavaScript so far. So in this video, we are going to try to go through this plan here. And the first one is just we are going to recap what we've seen so far concerning JavaScript. And then we are going to dig a little bit further in functions, and then from there we'll end everything with a basic project, which is a small task list or a to-do list, which is going to use all the basics we have learned so far to do that. So without any hesitation, let's get started. So the first thing we need to remember when it comes to JavaScript is that one, it is a programming language. Therefore, it involves you to know some of the concepts in programming, because programming is about actually solving problems. So that involves many tools and ways of thinking. So logical thinking, analysis of problems, and expressions of problems, and so on. So no, we did not go too much about the programming aspect there, but the idea is there, and I made you understand that that idea is universal to all programming languages. So JavaScript is of no exception. So the same thing go on. So this brought us to the concept of variables and so on. So we discovered that JavaScript, to create a variable, we use the keywords var, let, and const. So there are three elements you can use to create variables. Yes, they don't behave the same way when you are declaring variables, but for now, you should not be bothered because you won't see the effect right now. So, but in general, it is advised you go with let. The var is the oldest way, and the let and constant have been added recently. So, and const makes sense because it actually declares a constant variable such as pi and so on. So that's the idea there. Then we also want to discover some data structures such as strings and numbers and so on. So we discovered that yes, JavaScript can treat various forms of data or various forms of values. So we saw strings, we saw numbers, so be it integers or floating numbers, and so there's also a possibility for JavaScript to handle Boolean data. So that's is it true or false, and so on. And yes, we did not get time to go through the loops, but we've seen the if statement, the else statement, and so. So for the loops, we'll have the chance in the project for this end of week to explore the loops, or during our next live coming up on Friday. So basically, these are the things, and we also explored the basics of declaring a function and so on, and various ways of declaring functions. So, and we are going to use this information, this basic information we learned for the past few days, to now go further when it comes to functions and how to use JavaScript again. So the first thing I would like us to discuss here is what we call the scope. The scope. So when we are talking about programming in JavaScript, as you could see in our exercises or assignments, you declare the variables, and then you have functions. You actually try to fetch you try to select HTML elements through various ways of selecting HTML elements, and then all these everything you are doing seems to be scattered. So there must be a way of you being able to know that, for example, if this line needs an information from this line, it should be able to use it, and vice versa. But if you remember in one of our previous videos, I was having a challenge of selecting an element, and then it tells I actually inverted the selection and then the use. So I used the element without doing, and then later I did the selection of the element, and then I was getting this reference undefined. So basically, JavaScript, whenever you are trying to use an element A, so let's say you do A equals to something, it will actually make sure that you, let's say X plus Y, it will actually make sure that you already have X plus Y before you can use them. So that's why we declare them. So you could have added earlier on var or let X equals to something, Y equals to something, or simply you declare them as null without adding any value. So basically, JavaScript needs to know them before you can use them. So in any program you write in JavaScript, these declarations are very important for the language to know how to take care of your code. So, and it happens that it's not all the variables that can be easily accessed like this. So let's take an example. So we'll go to our JavaScript section. So I've created a project, day 19, and in which I've created an HTML document through which we are going to experiment all this. So if I declare a variable, let's say A, and then I assign it to the value of 19, and then I come here and say console log A, and we go back to our page and we reload, we should see the 19. So now if above the A, I decide to say console.log A, and then what happens? You see here it tells me that this reference is not defined and it is being used before it is declared. So you see, I'm trying to use the reference A before it is declared. So that is what we call actually the scope. So the scope is actually how available are the resources for other parts of the code, for all different parts of the code. How do you position the elements, functions, and variables we declare in a way that they won't be seen as undefined, like the way this line sees the A as undefined. So this is what the scope is all about. It's like getting everybody in the same class so that we can know who is who. So we need to position people at the right order in the right seats so that we can know who is who. So that's what scoping is all about. So in JavaScript we have what we have two types of scopes. The global scope, like in this variable right now. So this is a global, it is in a global scope. So when you declare a variable openly like this, anything that follows after it can access that variable. So if I have another thing that says alert here, it can still access that variable A without any problem. Anything at all next to it can use it. So it is the default scope. So after the default scope, we have what we call the local scope. Local scopes usually happen in functions. So if we have a function here, which is let's say test function, and then in the body of the function we decide to do console.log A seen in test function. So I'm going to use the plus for concatenation, and then I'll still use the variable A. So if we come down, we make a call to the function like this. So we get the alert, and you can see the variable A is still accessible inside the function because the variable is global. So it transcends the surrounding of the test function, and then it passes through the function test and goes inside, and it's still available in there. So that's what makes it a global variable. It does not matter wherever we are, as far as it is below it or after it, the variable can be accessed. So this is a good example of what we call global variable. So now if I declare another variable here, which is B inside the function test, and B is equals to 12, and then I say console log B, and then I come here and I do console log, that's outside the function, console log B, you see what will happen. So we get our alert. Now it's telling us reference B is not defined, and which line? Line 59. That is this line. So at this point, the variable b does not exist because the variable b is declared inside this function. Therefore, its entire existence is defined here. So it is what we call a local variable. This variable is completely local to this. This is a very interesting thing because it means if you have a variable here called b, you can still declare another variable here called b. So let b equals to, now I'll make this one 11. So you see now this one will work, but it won't reference this value. It will rather reference this value. So this is very important in reusability of names for functions. So you can see that. So we have our 19, we have our 11, which is this one. So it displays this one before we make the call to the function, which now displays the value of the value of b inside, so which is 12, and then displays the value of a, which is 90. So basically, that's what we can say about scope. So you have to be very careful when you have a variable here b. Don't think this b is the same as this b. They are not the same. Any variable defined or function defined inside the function lives inside it and doesn't have access to the outer area. Doesn't have anything defined inside, lives inside and is not accessible from outside it, but the inside of the function can have access to all global variables defined outside the function. So basically, that's what we can say about the scope. So that being done, so let's check this and we check this. So the other thing I would like us to go through is about the types of declarations of functions, how functions are defined. So the way we define this function here, test, is what we call a declarative declaration of a function. So this function is declared, and the reason is because basically how JavaScript works is that if we take this code right now, when we run it, JavaScript will copy all these elements, all these variables, and put them here. You see all these global variables. It will arrange them on top, including this function like this. It will pick them on top, and you can already understand why it does that, to bring them to the global scope, so that anything under can now be able to use them without having any issues. So this principle is actually called in JavaScript hoisting. Hoisting. So basically, it's like shaking the code, picking everything that is available in the global scope, put it on top so that any other thing below can have access to it. So when we have declarations of functions, these declarations can be hosted as well. So you can see. So I pick the function, I put it up, and the code still runs perfectly without any problem. And the variables are declared down on top as well. So JavaScript does this organization quickly before it runs the code. And when we declare functions by using the keyword function, the name of the function, and we do whatever we want in the body of the function, this form of defining a function is called a declaration of a function. And this is one of the good uses of it, apart from the fact that it also looks like most programming languages that use this style of defining functions. But one of the key importance of this is the hosting aspect. So the next thing we are going to look at is the expressions of functions. So for the expressions, a function is expressed as an expression because it is actually a variable, a normal variable assigned to the value assigned to the value with a function. So a function is used and then assigned to it as a value. So let's try to disable some of these things that display errors. That alerts, so this alerts because of the blocking of the screen. So a declaration of a function is, for example, let's have a variable add or return times 2, for example, as a function name, and then we do equals to, so we declare variable times 2, and that variable will be a function. So you see, but this time we don't give it a name, and then we return, let's say 2 times 2. So 2 times 2. So by doing so, whenever we call the function, we call it time 2 in bracket, and then it should be give us 4. Okay, so this is actually what it does. Yes, and here my problem is because I did not decide to show it, to display it, so it will just return. So for now, what I'm going to do is do console.log. So it will just log the sum. I could do that here, but I want to keep it clean. So you can see the 4 here displayed. So the function does its work as usual. So, but the particularity with this way of declaring the functions is that it won't be hosted like we said with the declarations. So these functions are not hosted, and also they only exist whenever the program reaches this level in the execution process. So as the code is running from top to bottom and it gets here, that's when this function will exist. So it means don't try to call that function somewhere here in test. So it won't work because the function wouldn't exist at all. If it was declared the same way, you could use it before it is declared, because you know JavaScript will host it before it runs it. So but these forms of declarations are also useful to scope functions, and to scope functions like this, to keep them kind of in their own boxes and make them only available whenever we need. So it is also a useful way of doing things. And I'm even insisting on this because in this modern JavaScript world era, you see a lot of these ways, these functions, and it is a bit confusing when you start learning. You kind of don't know which one is which. So we can take this for now again. So the next thing is what we call the arrow functions. So it's like another way of declaring another function, which is a bit more simplified than this one we have here. So in that case too, what do? We define a variable, let's say we call this one add, and then we now, instead of us to write function in bracket like we did with this one, we don't do that. We remove the term function completely and we leave only the brackets. So the brackets are there in case the function needs any parameter. Then instead of us to use this, we don't just do that, but we add a fat arrow in front of the brackets. So this fat arrow is actually, in my case, you see it as indeed a fat arrow, but you can see that it's equals to sign and then a greater than sign that gives me that shape. It's my font that is making me look that way. Otherwise, it is equals to sign and then greater than sign. So that's what this fat arrow is all about. So basically it says declare a function, and that's the function, and the function should return this. So what it does, it just returns an object. Or if what you are returning, or what the function is supposed to do is just one line thing, you could also write that thing as, let's say, 2 plus 2 or 3, something like this. So you could write it this way. So if you know that is one thing the function is going to do, it will just return that same thing. But if you know that the function can contain more things in it, then you can put it in square brackets. Otherwise, this is enough. So if we call our function now, in this case, I have no choice than to use the console log, and then I do add in bracket. So if you refresh, we should see a 5 displayed there. So this is the 5 here. So if we don't want, if you know that our function can do more of the adding, so I could declare a second function, arrow function, and name this one add to, and then we will now put everything in the bracket. So we are going to do let sum be equals to 0, sum is equals to sum existing sum plus 2. So right, and then we do console.log. So you can see in this one I'm writing much more things, so because of that I have to use curly brackets to encompass all these details about the function. So we can now call them add2 and see the result. So you can see it adds 0 to 2 and we get the 2. So this is the thing about actually arrow functions. So, and you see this a lot. You see these arrow functions these days a lot. So we can tick that as well. So the next thing is to discuss about the parameters. So far our functions here have no parameters. And the parameters are kind of data the function might require to actually execute properly or to have its logic completed. So if we look at our function here, which is times 2, so we wish we could times something, anything that is given to us, we just times it by 2. So in this case, we could be like, okay, that thing that could be given to us, we'll call it a variable or a next value that we might be expecting. So let's say we now say value. So whatever value people have to give us, they will represent it by this term value. And whenever that value comes inside the function, we call that value. It's like we have declared the variable value inside. So it's like we did let by putting it inside this bracket. It's like you declaring it like this. But JavaScript is in charge of doing this declaration for you. So the variable is available already inside the function. And now you can proceed by saying value times 2. So if you go, we call our function now, we don't pass in any value, it might give us an error. So let's refresh and see. So you see it says none because we actually tried to times nothing. So if we add it, let's say 7, we times it by 2 in this case, we are getting the 14. So this can be very useful in passing values or parameters to functions. And we could do the same thing with this. So anything that they give us, we add 3. So in this case, we take a value, we add 3. So if you now call console log value 8, we add 3, it's going to get 11. And this is the 11, right? So anything, the same thing can happen here. And then this is what we call one parameter. So we could also pass 2 parameters to a function. So in our function times here, for example, we could decide to say, okay, we want to times a and b. So we pass in a and b. So in this time around, we can change our function name into times. And here, all we have to do is times a and b. So we return the times of a and b. And by the way, let's now discuss the return value. So right, initially I just do console log. It's like the display aspect of the value. I'm handling it inside the function, but we could decide to actually leave the function, and that's the goal of the function, to operate the exact thing it is supposed to do. Let it do what it is supposed to do, and then for the display of whatever it produces, handle it differently on a different area. So we now ask it to return its result. That's all we require from it. It means whenever we call times, the function times here, and we give it another number, so we are saying whatever we are going to get whatever this operation will give here. So it's up to us now to decide to console log it at this point. So we do console log whatever value that is returned by this operation. So if we refresh, you should see the 14 here. So you can see line 69. That's 69. So that's the value. So that's a way of using 2 parameters and we returning the value. So here where we have the function doing console log, we could simply say return. So it will just return. And wherever we are calling the function add2, that's where we use console log. So good. And things should work smoothly. So the parameters, you can add as many as your function requires. And then the other thing we will notice is sometimes some of the parameters might have some default value. So let's say in this case the value b. In case the value b is not indicated, we just use 1. So it means when we are calling times and we do 7 and we don't indicate this, so we are saying that the b by default should be 1. So this is going to give us 7 times 1. So line 69 is 7. So line 69. So line 69 gives us 7. So that's the good calculation. So this is what we call default values. So I think this is quite a good exploration of the function parameters and so now let's deal with another situation called the callbacks. So before, let me clean up this area here. So we have a function here. So we can keep this one. And this is where we call it. So let me comment all this out. Let me comment all this out. Let me keep these ones. So if you recall in our previous videos, I think the 19, 18, 17, in the video day 17, we use the callback function stuff when we're using the add event listener to listen to events on a button. So here is where we will understand this principle of what we call callback function. So a callback function basically is like you passing a function to a function as a parameter. So that's why it is good that we studied these parameters on the functions. So you call a function once the function does its work. So instead of us to pass any particular value or any standard value to a function, rather we'll pass it a function. So let's take an example. So let's take our function, we'll create a function, let's say square. So let's call a function, let's declare function square. And then what we will do is we'll have this function take a parameter as a number to be this squared, so number. And then we'll do let squared is equals to number times number itself. So once we are done with that, basically at this point we could say return squared, right? We could say required squared, and then here we could call our function, for example, square. So we use console log to see the result, and we call the function squared, and then we give it a value of 2. So if we preview, you should get 4. So syntax error, so that's line 83. Function, so I forgot the keyword function. So we refresh now, but we still have another syntax error, unexpected function. Oh god. Okay, so this is my problem. I said let square, so if I was to use that, I'm supposed to do function here. So I wanted to use a declaration and at the same time an expression. So we use the expression and go ahead with that. So we refresh, we should see the 2, which is the 4 rather, which is the square of 2. So this is it, line 88. So that's the result here. So basically at this point, once we have our function declared like this, we could decide to add a callback function, which is whenever the operation happens, it will call back the function. So we'll pass a second parameter to the function. It doesn't have to be a second parameter, it can be the only parameter. So in this case, because we already have a parameter called num, so we pass a callback parameter, callback. So we are trying to say, okay, whenever you are done, call this callback function. So it is a function, we use the bracket and we call callback function. So by doing that, we are saying that whenever we are calling this function square, we pass it two parameters. One is going to be the number, and the second one is going to be a function. So in this case, for example, we called so we don't have the function callback yet, so we call the square function by passing it 2. So this will yield an error to tell us that the parameter count is not correct. So if I reload, so you can see cut error callback is not defined. So that's the first error I mentioned. So the callback function is not defined. So I can define the function here and say, and you can see I'm using a declaration, not an expression, because I expect JavaScript to host it for me. So that function requires a parameter, one parameter. So let's say param, and then what would the function do to the param is up to us. So let's say the function just returns called back with. So whatever we pass it, it will give it to us here and say the function has been called back with. So that's the function that will be called whenever this callback is this function is called. Okay, so we get undefined. It makes sense because I forgot to put return here. So we return that, and you can see callback with. So the idea is this. Let me go through it again. So you declare a function which takes a parameter another function. So in the initial functions process, it makes a call to the callback the parametered function, and then inside the parametered function can actually be looked up, and then once found, whatever that parametered function does, the data passed to it is going to go through all this process. So when we are calling our parent function, we have to pass it in now a callback function. So also note that the name here doesn't have to be callback. You might think this name must match this, because if you say, let's say if we just name it P, for example, it doesn't really matter. It will still run perfectly. So where we need to use callback is actually here. We are actually passing this whole function here. So it doesn't also mean we have to write the function different like this. We can pick it entirely like this, and let's say this, bring it here, and remove this name, and now it will take a parameter, whatever the parameter is, and that's all. So it should get the same result. So you see, so usually you will see these kind of functions being used and nested inside functions and nested. So this is what we call the callback functions. So it is a function that is actually invoked by another function, and that inner function is passed through a parameter to the parent function. So basically that's it. So the next thing I would like us to look at is the closures. So the closures are an interesting aspect of JavaScript as well. So let's go down here. So closures. So a closure is actually a phenomenon that happens when a function in JavaScript calls another function inside it. And with the principle of the scope, the inner function ends up memorizing the variables or the variables in the scope of its parent. So now let's look at the aspect of creating closure functions. So this is how it works. So let's assume we want to have something that counts, for example, from count is 1, and then the next time we make an operation, let's say the user clicks on a button increment, it displays the count into 2, and then it keeps on increasing the count no matter how many times we call the function. So that function call could happen on a mouse click, for example, on a button and so on. So how do we implement such thing? And we are going to see it now through the assignment we have. So we are going to create a first function. We declare a function, let's say count manager also, and then it won't take any parameter. And then inside the function, we'll declare a variable count, which will be set to 0 initially. So inside this function, this parent function would rather return another function, so which will also take no parameter as well. We don't need to pass it any parameter, and then it will just return count incremented. So this incremented is basically like +1. So it's like this +1. So we use incremented. So when that is incremented, outside the function now, we can decide to say, let's say we have a variable let, and then we name it counter, and then we now say it is equals to counter manager. So we actually make an expression of the function. So we create an expression of the function counter manager, and then once we have that expression, we can access its inner function. So I forgot to name the function here, so it's going to be increment. So I forgot the function name here, increment. So once we have that, so by saying counter this is actually going to give us this. It's like you call the function counter, and since the function counter manager returns this, so it is going to return another function, and this means the counter here is a function, so which means we can call it like this. So since we are just returning values, it makes sense that we use console.log to try to see those values. So if I do console.log, we go to our browser to preview. So it says error, count is not a function. Count is not a function. Counter rather, so I used the wrong one. So we go ahead, so you can see it displays 1. So if I do this like 2-3 times, you can see the number of times I use is going to keep on counting. So this could be very interesting, or it can be of a good use. So we are going to apply all these basic things we just learned now to create this interesting project we sketched here. So basically the project is going to have a number of tasks which we are going to use closure to count, and then the list here we are going to use a list and list elements to create it, and then we'll have an input field for with a form, and then a button here to add new tasks. So I already have an HTML CSS here that will help us start this. So some of the basic elements we need to start that form is what I just started here. So I'm going to add some of the content in the body tag. So I'll set a main tag in which all this will exist, and then we'll have a UL tag. So before the UL tag, we have this tasks thing, so we could use some heading 1, or let's say heading 3, and then we're going to say task count. So we are going to have another tag here, span, and that tag will have the class ID, or the ID of count, so that we can target it to bring the count inside it, to load the count inside it. So next to it now we are going to have a noded list, and we'll have a list. So let's say task 1, and you can have task 2 and whatever task the user enters. So this 2, this is 3. So right below it we can now have a div of class wrapper. That's the class I defined, and then I will have an input that will be of type text. No need to set name, but I need an ID so that I can pick it. So this will be the task ID. So then next to it we'll add a button which will have the caption of add. So if we go and check our page, we should have this automatically. So I actually defined this CSS so that we'll get this result as simple as that. So our goal is we'll start with empty list, and then anytime we write something and we click on add, it should just push it up in the list and let us see the results. So we'll do quickly that. So we'll remove this one, and we can give this a class or an ID, and then we name it, let's say, tasks list. So basically like this. So we'll now go back to our JavaScript area. So what I'm going to do is I'll still keep this whole JavaScript here, although it is a bit noisy, but I'll start the actual code right on top here so that we don't always have to go on top. So handle tasks. So the first thing we need to do is to grab all these elements we need. So first of all, we need to get the count. So the count panel. So let me use const counter. We'll call that one counter is equals to document dot query selector query selector. Yes, something wrong. Query selector, and then it is an ID, so we use the hash count. So we are grabbing that element as the counter. Then we'll grab the task list. So we also do with const task list equals to document dot query selector, and then we'll pass it the ID as well of tasks list. So next we'll pick the input, which is going to contain the task. So we get the input. So const input or task is equals to document dot query selector. So we have the ID as well, task. Then the last thing is to get the button. So const btn, or name it btn, is equals to document dot query selector. Here we have only one button, so we can just pass in the tag name, and query selector will pick the first button it finds. So what we are going to do is to listen to the event, the click event on the button. So we'll do this. We'll do button dot add event listener, and what event are we listening to? Click, and then we pass our callback function, which will take the event. So we'll have the event object and everything. Then we'll do event dot. So this is one thing we need to look at. Okay, I have a typo in the name of the function. So this is one good thing you need to pay attention to. JavaScript is very is a case sensitive. So already callback within for so okay, and got assignment to constant variable at count manager count. Okay, so I'm having a conflict of variables here. Let me name this variable tasks count. Because I declared a variable as constant, and then I had a variable here called count somewhere. So this one is telling me you are trying to modify a variable that was defined as a constant. So you cannot do that. So basically, what we do, so we are here. So we change the name of our variables. We shouldn't have this conflict now. So we can see we have the input logged and then the event. So the thing I want to underline here is that we could say event dot value, task dot value, and try to reach out to the content that is in the input field. So by doing this, we see we get the value. So in some occasions, you might do that through the event element and capture the input fields. So that's if we decide to do the form submission. For now, we want to target the actual input the user sent. So we are going to do, when the event is done, we are going to just take, so let input equals to, or we could even name this one task field. So that's the task field, and then we can go ahead and say task is equals to task field. So that's the actual task. So once we have the value the user entered, the next thing is to be able to create an HTML element, which is the li type element. So create element, we are going to do let li is equals to document dot create element, and that element we are creating is li. So once we have the element created, we are going to do li dot inner content, or if you want you can use inner text. Inner content is equals to the task. So once we have that, we also have the task list. So we just have to go ahead and do task list dot append child, and we append the li. So this should give us a way of adding tasks. Task 1, I press enter. So here we have a challenge. Okay, so what did I do here? Inner content, let me use inner text. Inner text. So we add task 1. So we get a task. Task 2. Okay. So this works perfectly fine. So the next thing for us is to handle the adding of the count. So we could go ahead and say, like anytime we do this, we just pick the counter. So that's the task count here. We pick the value there. So let's say we do count. Let me just name it C equals to the task counter dot inner text. So I take the inner text and then I will do pass int. So I'll pass it as an integer, and then I'll do +1. And once I do +1, I can go ahead and now say task count dot inner text is equals to C. So by doing that, I'm going to change the count every time we click. So except I have an error. So it says reference pass int. So refresh. Task 1. So we are getting not a number. Okay, I'm having an issue because initially the value inside that count is empty. So we'll put it 0 and we refresh. Task 1. So we get that added. Task 2 and so on. So I could do that, or we could decide to abstract the whole process of adding a task into a function and then use a callback function. I actually wanted to implement that, but the time is becoming too long, and I would like you to use that as an assignment and try your hands. Try to change this process here. Handle this using the closure functions. The implementation of the task count using the closure function. So this is it. Thank you so much for staying around, and see you in the next lesson.